Nice to see everybody. Nice to see everybody. Another week. This particular time, people have been asking me about my awareness at the beginning of my stroke and aphasia. And I had my first assessment uh, in October 2011. And at that time, the assessment ends with the words that I was aware of my deficits. Well, for the several more weeks, I kept asking the SLP, the therapist, what that really meant, because I understood those words, awareness of my deficits, and I was somewhat aware that I was quite aware that I was having problems with my language, but I still couldn't understand what that really meant. The fact that I couldn't understand being able to speak, read, write, I guess that those were the deficits of which I was aware, but I still wanted to see the details of that. Can I write this way versus that way? I didn't even know that there was a difference between writing it with my hand versus off of a computer, because they had two different kinds of deficits. I was able to speak like this and use my recording. I didn't know that until later, but they were quite different than if I were reading from a book or page and recording that and listening to that back. They were two different deficits also that I wasn't aware of until I had the evidence that allowed me to see what had happened much, much later. But after a couple more months, I figured that I should just start an inventory of my deficits. And that is what I tried to do. I listed these deficits in my diary. I called them symptoms, and I wrote as best I could, although if you look at my diary, you'll see that most of the words were spelled properly, but the grammar and syntax were still damaged. But I was listing all the different symptoms of my deficits as best I could understand them going forward. And as I began to be more aware, I began more aware that I was getting better over time, building up what turns out to be a critical mass of understanding. Again, not realizing that awareness is a skill, just like reading, writing, and speaking. Awareness is another skill that has to be learned, has to be practiced. You have to keep working on understanding what it is you're actually thinking about what has been happening to you. So really having that additional dialogue between you and another you on the inside, trying to figure out that you were rising to a new level of consciousness, which is a useful way to refer to that, because if you're not quite at that critical mass, you can't necessarily get to where you would like to get in terms of being able to then understand what has been happening to you. So you really have to keep working on it, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, thinking about it, considering it, taking in the feedback, and beginning to understand little by little that you are becoming more aware until you become more fluent with that new skill. But I began to understand that really there were muscles just like any other dendrites and synapses that had to be grown so that I would become more aware. But what did bother me, I guess I can call it that, what did bother me over the years was understanding that being told on my first day that I was aware of my deficits, not understanding what that meant until, I'll say years later, that I became more aware, more consciously aware that I was beginning to understand how all of these deficits work. That is the bother of it, was that I began to understand that the being told from the first day that you are more aware, when you won't become aware until some time in the future, is more like putting the cart in front of the horse. So that's how I began to understand it now going forward. But I do appreciate it. It was a good week, and I will see you next week. Thanks again. Talk to you soon. Bye.